We are studying essentially the church, and this is number 13 in our alternative community series. Now, this is the language that we have decided to employ to talk about the church. And we've asked a very simple question, and we've tried to answer this question from various different angles. Here's the simple question that we've been asking. What does it mean to be the church of Christ in the world today? What does it mean to be God's church? Well, it had better not be simply a formal profession or connection. It had better not be merely a cultural thing that you're kind of born and raised into. I mean, it wasn't that for me. I mean, what is Christianity at its core? What launched the movement? What are its characteristics? Or let me ask the question this way. What is it supposed to be? Because some people are suggesting that it's not looking like what it was originally intended to be. And we're going to probe that right now in part 13 of our alternative community series. Now, I'm titling this final message in the series, Street Cred. This is language that has emerged in the last 20, 30 years or so to basically approximate a very, very good idea. Street credibility is where the general public out there on the street senses, observes that whoever's being evaluated is true to their identity. Are you tracking with me? But not only does the general perception lean in the direction of, those people or that person, they, he, she, they're true to their profession, to their identity, to their roots, but it goes a step further than that. Street cred essentially equates to not only are you true, not only is there integrity, not only is your life lining up with what you claim it's supposed to be, but street credibility discerns that you actually have an interest in what's best for the people on the street. You're for us, not just for yourself. Are you tracking with me? Are you understanding the concept of street credibility? Street credibility is basically what used to be called, I guess back in the 1950s or something, moral authority. Have you heard the term moral authority? That just means people are perceiving that what you're claiming is commensurate with what you're doing. Are you still with me? So what is the church? Well, the church is, I've been suggesting over and over again, the church is an alternative to what is normally considered the way human beings do life and exist. Human beings have general patterns that define our social engagements, our political engagements, our familial engagements as husbands and wives and parents and children. Life reveals certain general patterns. People live by certain ethics or directives. And I'm suggesting to you that the Church of Christ in its beginnings, as it was launched, was intended to actually go against the grain of the general trajectory of culture and the world in general. In fact, you find things in the Bible, really strong statements in the Bible like this: to be a friend of the world is to be the enemy of God. Now, that's a pretty strong statement, wouldn't you agree? To be a friend of the world is to be the enemy of God. Now, the world in this definition is not the orb that we call Earth that's floating in space. It's not the Earth. The world is kind of the warp and woof of the world system. What are the general patterns that define what it looks like? What is the world in its ethos, or what the Germans call Zeitgeist? The spirit of the age, the prevailing malaise, the atmosphere that defines. Now, if you just watch a little bit of television and take a look at a few billboards and pay attention to the advertising industry of our world, which is one of the most lucrative businesses in the world or aspects of free enterprise in the world, you get a sense that human beings in general are being fed a worldview that is very, very much centered on doing what's right for me, myself, and I. There's a bumper sticker that popularizes this idea: move, follow, or get out of the way. It's this idea that I'm for me, and I suggest you had better be for you because I'm coming after you. Sometimes it's called climbing the ladder. Sometimes it's called capitalism. Now, capitalism isn't all bad, but you've all heard of something called capitalism without something. Capitalism without you haven't heard of it? Without a conscience. Capitalism without a conscience. Capitalism that essentially says, I exist for me, and I suggest you had better exist for you because I'm coming after you. I'm taking your stuff. I'm encroaching upon your territory, and don't you dare operate on the assumption that we can coexist because I'm coming after you. This is the general zeitgeist, the spirit of the age, the Germans would say. This is what's going on in the world. It is a way of existing that is extremely self-centered. Now, there have been movements down through history and even in modern times that have been alternative movements, alternative to the norm. Now, one of these alternative movements happened in the 1980s, right here in the Pacific Northwest, centering in Seattle and then moving out from Seattle, called the alternative music scene, or more specifically, the grunge music culture. Now, there were a number of bands that made up this scene, like Nirvana and Soundgarden and Alice in Chains, Pearl Jam. These were particular bands. Now, I know what some of you are thinking. That's just run-of-the-mill, pop music, rock music. What does that have to do with anything? But this was unique. This was a movement because these were young people. These were people who were teenagers and young adults who were examining, who were looking, who were paying attention to the music scene in general. And they saw coming out of the 1960s and then into the 70s and into the 80s, they saw glam rock and metal. And they saw that it had become an enterprise, a business, that what had started as a movement with a message had morphed into a sellout. And so these particular bands, Kurt Cobain and the others, they arose and said, we want nothing to do with the corporate music scene. There was a label that started, an alternative label that started in Seattle called Sub Pop. In other words, sub, under what is popular. We're not interested in popularity. We have something to say. And what they were saying was often, at least at the beginning stages, a very scathing rebuke, a critique of capitalism as it had encroached upon all art forms for the almighty dollar. And they resisted it. And they made vows. These people made vows to one another as band members and to their community. We'll never sell out. You can't buy us. We have something to say. We're not signing with any big labels. We're just going to say what we have to say, and we don't want your money. Well, that's how the movement began. But watch, something happens. This is a phenomenon that occurred with the alternative music scene, the grunge music scene. And once I explain it to you, you'll see, hey, yeah, that's a pattern that pretty much is noticeable with a lot of movements, and it could get a little close to home here, so brace yourself. Okay? Well, what happens is, first you begin with kind of a puritanical movement with a mission and a message. You might call it a revolution. I mean, we've got something we want to say. We've got something we want to do. We want to rock the world, not in the rock and roll sense, but in the revolution sense. Well, then the movement with a mission happens to become popular. And as it becomes popular trend, very interesting. People like Kurt Cobain and the others who defined the grunge music scene, they were so resistant to popularity and so resistant to being bought by the music industry that they would not succumb to the fashion ideals of glam rock in the 1980s. So their hair was messy on purpose. Their clothes were frumpy and didn't match on purpose. Their shoes were beat up and tore up on purpose. And you know what happened? Macy's said, let's make clothes like that and sell the kind of horrible looking clothing that these people are wearing, and we'll call it grunge fashion. And it became an industry. And Macy's and other department stores started cashing in on what was never intended to be cashed in on. Are you still tracking with me? So the movement with a mission morphed into a popular trend and then became a commodified product. People were now paying hard-earned dollars to be identified with the movement. But then it goes a little deeper and more diabolical, this phenomenon, this psychological social phenomenon, because the commodified product automatically begins to attract pretenders who are only there for the money and don't share the original missional ideals. Revolution is not coursing through their veins. They just see an opportunity to capitalize on the revolution and make some money. And so as more and more pretenders and posers are attracted to the movement, what happens? Well, it becomes corrupted at its core, until finally we began to witness in the early 90s something astounding, that the grunge music scene became increasingly populated with posers, pretenders, hypocrites, if you will. Hypocrites, actors, became populated with posers who were in it for the money and the hype until the real grungers left. So now watch this. Now you had the shoes and the clothes and the hair and even the sound. You had the shell of the thing. You had the appearance of the thing. But what didn't you have anymore? You didn't have the character of the thing. You didn't have the heart of the thing. You didn't have the motive that created the thing in the beginning. The revolution was drained out of it, and now it was just a cash cow for people who know how to crunch numbers and make money. So all the true and faithful who still had revolution pulsating in their hearts, what did they do? They exited and said, we want nothing to do with this. And some of them not only exited, some of them were so overwhelmed by the sellout of the movement that the pressure drove them to depression and addiction and a string of suicides. That's how badly they wanted nothing to do with the corporate sellout that was taking place right under their noses. So street cred is compromised when people begin to notice patterns that indicate a sellout. Credibility, moral authority is lost when people begin to sense that all they're witnessing is the shell of the former thing that had substance. Are you still with me? Are you tracking? Because here's what's going down. Not only did the alternative music scene have its premise, its heart, its soul. The church, Christianity, began by its founder, Jesus Christ, with a particular heart, a particular motive, a particular, let's call it marching orders that he gave to his followers. He essentially said, hey, this is what I'm about, and this is what you ought to be about as well if you're going to be followers of me. So Jesus lands on the scene of popular commercialized religion called Judaism that was controlled by the Pharisees and the Sadducees, who were sellouts to the Roman Empire, who actually had positions that they were paid to occupy over the religious institution of the time. They were paid by the political institution in order to be their puppets in those religious positions. So Jesus comes on the scene in the midst of all of that pretentiousness, all of this hollow, hypocritical, pretentious religion, and he says, announcing, this is the first public thing he said, by the way, according to Luke's gospel. The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me because he has anointed me to preach the gospel. That word is good news, happy message, glad tidings. He has come upon me with an anointing, a calling, a specific mandate to preach the good news to, now notice his target audience, the poor. He has sent me to heal the brokenhearted, people that are mentally teetering, the depressed, the hurting, those who have experienced the traumas of life and don't know whether they want to live another day. This is the brokenhearted. Jesus came for the poor and the brokenhearted to proclaim liberty, freedom, deliverance to the captives, to whatever they're captive. He's abolishing everything that brings human beings into bondage to any external forces that would deplete them of their humanity and their dignity. I'm liking him so far, are you? So Jesus is here for the captives and the recovery of sight to the blind. Yes, people with physical blindness, but people with mental, emotional, social blindness to the needs of others. He came to heal blind eyes, to set at liberty those who are oppressed, those who are on the margins of society, those who are on the underbelly of the system, those who know no matter how hard they try, they can't get a leg up. They can't make it. They're pressed down by systemic problems that are posing as political regime. To proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. I love that line. Jesus came saying, God likes you, whoever you are. The poor, the brokenhearted, the dysfunctional, the traumatized, those who are hurting, those who are oppressed. Hey, by the way, Jesus says, I'm here to tell you, you have God's favor. He's for you, even though the whole system is against you. I'm still liking him. Are you still liking him? I'm liking him, but I'm sensing the makings of revolution here. Because there are people who won't like this. In fact, if you just go to Luke 4, hey, do this later this afternoon. Do me a favor. Just go to Luke chapter 4 and just read it, the whole thing. And you'll see that right before this, he's saying this in his hometown of Nazareth, and they're saying, hey, he's ours. He's our boy. He's our guy. Whoa, the Messiah, the King of the world might come from right here in Nazareth. We like him. They were favorable in the previous verses. And after he said this, you know what the text goes on to say? They became enraged and took him out to the brow of a cliff to throw him off, and he just slipped away and continued his ministry. They were about to cut it short. They wanted to murder him because he was not the kind of Messiah they wanted. Because he was saying, Hey, all of you who are a part of the popular and successful system, I'm here for those who are out there, who are hurting and broken and are disadvantaged by the system that you're benefiting from. And then they decided, hey, let's kill him. We don't want him as the Messiah. It's an astounding story. Well, according to Matthew's version of the beginning of the ministry, going all the way back to right before he's going to be born, this is astounding. Please track with us. The angel says to Mary, hey, you're pregnant and you're going to give birth and you're going to call his name Jesus because he's going to save his people, Israel, the religious establishment, from their sins. Well, he goes on, after he's born, to grow up and to perform a series of actions that get him crucified by the religious establishment because they were resistant to his determination to liberate them from their self-serving impulses so that they could see the world and love people in ways they never had. So he came to save them from their sins. I'd like to give you what is a definition of sin from a general reading of Scripture. This is a combination of texts that I've synthesized into a simple definition of what the Bible means when it uses this horrible word, this bad word, the bad thing called sin. What is sin? Is it breaking religious taboos and rules? Far from it. Sin is a very concrete, emotional, social reality that manifests itself in our relational dynamics. Sin is the triumph of the individual interests over community interests. Sin is the elevation of me, over the us. Sin is the preeminence of the almighty I over the minuscule you, the too bad for you, because I'm coming for you. Sin is self-centeredness as opposed to other-centeredness. Now, if I had time, I'd ask you to sit with that definition of sin for a while, to just meditate on it. But essentially, Christianity began with a particular heart, a soul. There was revolution in its veins, and as Jesus completed his ministry in this world, we basically come away from the New Testament with the Christian claim being something like this. Hey, everybody, God is love. Jesus came and proved it. And we, his alternative community, happen to believe it, so we love you on the premise that he loves us. So we're here, we, the church, we're here not for us. We're here for you, because he came for us and for you, and we're following. But nevertheless, with all of this, I mean, you have to be sitting there right now saying, man, this Jesus guy, he's incredible. I want to be a part of that. Well, somehow we've lost what it is because Christianity in its modern permutation is not attractive anymore. So the vibe it's giving off on the street is not a vibe that people are running to. It's a vibe that people are running from. In this remarkable, groundbreaking book, Growing Young, the authors assess Christianity, especially in America, and say that there is no major Christian tradition that is growing in the U.S. today. American congregations are aging. That is to say that young people are departing and those who are staying are getting older, and so the buildings are just closing down and being turned into swap meets and art galleries. Because the thing is not true anymore to its master, to its rabbi, to its teacher. So the book goes on and says, let's make that statistic, what they just shared, a bit more personal. Visualize a photograph of the young people in your congregation. Just go ahead and just visualize all the young people. And then they say this: Now imagine holding a red pen and drawing an X through almost 50% of the faces of all the young people you know that are connected with Christianity. That many will fall away from the faith as young adults. I have a pastor friend, his name is Chad Stewart, spoke at his church recently over near Washington, D.C. for a religious liberty summit. And he told me, he said, man, I got some of my people mad. I said, how'd you do that? Give me some tips. He said, I got my people mad. He said, we had about 68 teenagers and young adults on stage to sing a song. And as I introduced them, I said, hey, by the way, of the 68 young people standing up here right now, about 40 of them will have nothing to do with Christianity by the time they graduate from college. It's going to be a really pretty song they're going to sing, and he walked off. But he was simply being true to the math and the trends. Here's the thing. This book by James Emery White is astounding. It's called The Rise of the Nuns. What are the nuns? That's where on all the official forms of society, when you're asked the question, what is your religious affiliation? More and more people are just checking the box that says none. Not interested. Not interested. Barna Group in 2018, last year, said that atheism doubles among Generation Z. These are the young people that are in their early teens that are coming up right now, and they are making their exodus from Christianity right now. Barna Group says that the percentage of teens who identify as atheists is double that of the general population. Let's listen to an atheist. This is one of the foremost voices for atheism in the world today, specifically in America, but worldwide. His name is Sam Harris. Sam Harris, a few years back, wrote a book. Really, it's not really much of a book. It's a letter. He literally titled it Letter to a Christian Nation by Sam Harris. And it was a national bestseller. I read it the week it came out. I mean, it's a letter to me, after all. You should have read it. It's a letter to you. It's a letter to Christians. I said, oh, he's addressing me. So I read it the week it came out. And these are the kinds of things he said. Christians, now I don't know if you can bear this, but you're going to have to, because here we are and I have the stage. Christians have abused, oppressed, enslaved, insulted, tormented, tortured, and killed people in the name of God for centuries. Now, you can sit with that for a minute, and you can argue with it if you want to, but he's simply stating a historical fact. Okay, this is just what Christianity has done for centuries. It's done other things too, like build hospitals and orphanages, right? It's a mixed bag. But he's stating a fact, and what he's suggesting in his letter to a Christian nation is he's saying this. He's saying, hey, I'm telling you that Christianity is losing street cred. You're losing moral authority century after century because your claim is not panning out in your behavioral patterns. That's essentially what he's saying. He goes on and he says, countries with high levels of atheism are also the most charitable. And he gives the numbers. Literally, if you find the countries on the earth that have the fewest possible believers and the most atheists, per capita, the people are more generous in their financial giving. And he gives the stats, okay? Both in terms of the percentage of their wealth that they devote to social welfare programs and the percentage that they give to developing countries. I mean, he's just looking at the math and he's saying, man, this is amazing. There's something wrong. Could it be that the real grungers who had the heart for revolution find the shell of the thing so distasteful that they left? We think they're atheists, but really they're true believers? Could it be that there are a bunch of people who have rejected the form of Christianity and religion, but they still believe in justice and mercy? Could it be that from God's vantage point, he looks down and says, that's not it, but it says it's it, and that is it, though it says it's not? Consider the ratio of salaries paid. This will make us all very uncomfortable and some of us jubilant. Consider the ratio of salaries paid to top-tier CEOs and those salaries paid to the same firm's average employees. That's a little, he's a good writer, but that's not one of his best sentences. Okay, so he's essentially saying here, he's saying, listen, let's just consider the ratio, the difference between the highest paid people in a company and the lowest paid people in the company, the CEOs and the average employee. You with me still? Well, this is what he finds out. That in Britain, the ratio is 24-1. That sounds pretty amazing. I mean, if you're the CEO, you get paid 24 more times than the average wage. I mean, that person's doing pretty well. In France, it's 15-1. In Sweden, it's 13-1. In the United States, he's wanting to emphasize this, where 80% of the population expects to be called before God on Judgment Day. In other words, 80% of Americans claim to be Christians. The ratio is 475-1. 475-1. You remember back in, 2007, 8, 9, right in there? The financial crash that rocked the United States and nearly took the whole world financial system down. And then when all was said and done, we realized, hey, wait a minute. The whole world financial system nearly came crashing down because of approximately less than 100 CEOs of financial institutions and businesses that essentially pocketed more money or as much money as they possibly could until the system came to the breaking point, and then they walked away and said, by the way, the only way I'll quit is if you pay me a parting bonus of multiplied millions of dollars. And the government, the United States government, for crying in your soup, stepped in and paid what we called a bailout, a very large sum of money from taxpayers' money. And the first thing that was done with that bailout money was to pay the parting multi-million-dollar bonuses to the dastardly dudes that brought the system down. It's astounding. And then on Sunday, they all went to church. And that's the point he's making. It's the point Sam Harris is making. Many a camel, now he's quoting scripture, this atheist. Many a camel, it would seem, expects to pass easily through the eye of a needle. You remember? He's quoting Jesus, where Jesus says it's easier for a camel to enter in through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter into heaven. Because the moment money's on the table, motives get compromised. Well, Jesus understood this, and apparently Mr. Sam Harris, foremost atheist, understands it. Now check this out. People, I'm suggesting to you, and I'm just giving you a sampling, people who are not Christians seem to be more aware of what a Christian ought to be than many Christians. We need to do some soul searching. I mean, if you claim to believe in Jesus, if I claim to believe in Jesus, we need to re-examine who he said he was and what he was about and ask ourselves, are we about what he was about? Well, Paul understood this as he was examining popular religion of his time, and he forthrightly, with the most blunt words imaginable, said to the religious establishment of his time, Judaism, he said, listen, the name of God is blasphemed among unbelievers because of you. People don't believe in God because of the way you have misrepresented God. That's what he's saying. It's astounding. Okay, this research came out just last week, so I have to bring it to you. Pew Research Center just released the result of a study that is in the wake of all of the turmoil and controversy going on at the southern border. I am not here this morning to make any political statements. I'm not going to share with you my opinion of anything regarding whether children should be in cages or not. That's not my point. What I'm going to share with you is just the data that is rather disturbing that Pew Research has just revealed, and that is 65% of those who claim no religious affiliation also said that they felt, 65%, that the U.S. had a responsibility to care for those who are being displaced by violence and war. 65% of unbelievers said, yep, we should be helping these people. I mean, come on, the quality of their life, they're hurting, they're suffering. 65% said we should help them. Pew Research revealed that only 25% of white evangelicals felt responsibility to help people who had been forced to leave their countries into horrifying circumstances. 65% of atheists said we should help people. Only 25% of professed Christians said we should help people. As a follower of Jesus, that's painful for me. I'm sorry. Now, that's not getting into the details of whether there should be border security, whether or not there should be a remedied immigration program. Certainly there should be. But all of that is beside the point when people are suffering. Certainly there's a way to alleviate suffering in the process of fixing the system. I mean, we put people on the moon, for crying out loud. We spend over $500 billion a year on building weapons to wage war. And the government expects us to believe that we just don't have the money for better cages or to put people in situations that would be less egregious to their quality of life. Now, you can do what you want with it, but I'm telling you that something's going on here. Now, Heather Thompson Day, who happens to be a Seventh-day Adventist, by the way, just wrote an article last week for Newsweek on this very issue. And she says that the fact that non-Christians are more than twice, she's just looking at the Pew Research, right? She's just read what we read. And she says the fact that non-Christians are more than twice as likely as white evangelicals to take the commands of Scripture seriously should tell us all that religion as we know it is broken. She goes on and says this, quoting from Paul, or referencing Paul. Paul warns his protege Timothy of this very thing in 2 Timothy 3, verse 5. He said that in the last days the church will have a form of godliness, but will deny the power of God because they will be living apart from Christ. And then she hits us right in the throat with this statement. She says, actually, if you read the text, the Timothy text that she's referring to, if you read the text, when Paul warns Timothy of the last days, he doesn't warn him of terrible events. He warns him of terrible people. And the terrible people he's warning of have a profession of godliness. They're Christians. Christianity, Paul is warning at the end of time, will be gutted by self-serving interests. 2 Timothy chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. But know this, that in the latter days, perilous times will come. Why, Paul? Earthquakes, right? Tornadoes, right? Well, here's the perilous times. For men will be lovers of themselves. Lovers of what, everybody? Say it out loud. Money, boasters, proud, blasphemers, disobedient to parents, unthankful, unholy, unloving, unforgiving, slanderers, without self-control, brutal, despisers of good, traitors, headstrong, haughty, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, having a form of godliness. These are not unbelievers. These are professed believers. Having a form of godliness but denying its power. And then Paul very strongly says, turn away from those people. They've given evidence that they do not actually believe in Jesus. Listen, if I'm following Jesus because of what I get out of it, as though he's some kind of, to quote, modern prosperity gospel Christianity that's all over the television and the bestseller list, if I perceive God as a blessing machine for me, as kind of a good luck charm that gives me the best parking spot at the store, as the one who's going to make sure I get what I want. If I'm following Jesus, if I'm living for Jesus because of what I'm getting out of it, I'm not following Jesus. I'm following me. I'm living for me under the guise of following Jesus. So as weird as it may seem, what I'm suggesting to us this morning is that corporate Christianity has become about the best place in the world to hide from the actual claims of Christ. It is a weird twist, isn't it? Okay, so transitioning here to a very odd biblical prophetic declaration of what Christianity will look like at the end of time. And these things, I saw another angel come down from And after these things, I saw another angel come down from heaven, having great authority, and the earth was illuminated with his glory. That sounds like a positive thing. The earth will be illuminated with the glory of God. There will be a movement. There will be an alternative movement. There will be a revolution. There will be people, hopefully you and me, people like you and me worldwide, who will rise up and actually recover the original heart and soul and revolution that Christ brought to the world and live it. There will be a global illumination project. But the next verse says, and he cried, this angel with all this glory, leading the revolution, and he cried mightily with a loud voice saying, Babylon, pause right there. Babylon, I have time to prove this to you, but I can prove this to you. Eschatologically, prophetically, Babylon here is symbolic for corporate mainstream Christianity at the end of time. The big psycho-edifice that we call Christianity. Babylon the Great is fallen, and has become the dwelling place of demons, Christianity, a prison of every foul spirit, a cage of every unclean and hateful bird. Watch this. What is it that's corrupted the thing? For all the nations have drunk of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This is biblical symbolism for the union of church and state. This is when the religious system gets in bed with the political system for political and financial gain. That's what this is describing. The kings of the earth, the political leaders of the earth, have committed fornication with her, that is the religious system. And the merchants, now we're talking about the financial system, we're talking about money, and the merchants of the earth have become rich through the abundance of her luxury. This is astounding. This is absolutely astounding. So Jesus had previously said, well, you'll know the real thing when you encounter the real thing, because it'll have a certain look to it. It'll have a certain vibe. It'll have a certain street cred. John chapter 13, verse 35, by this all will know that you are my disciples, if you have love for one another. Love is the defining characteristic that gives credibility and moral authority to the church of God, to the alternative community. Listen. What we say is only as believable as what we do. Swiss theologian Hans Earl von Balthasar, I don't know why his parents did that to him, but anyways, makes this astounding statement that is just at the height, that's the uppermost in my mind right now over the last year or so. In this single declaration, he says, listen, with regards to Christianity in the world, love alone is credible. Listen, you can't expect people to become a part of the church by simply arguing them into subjection with doctrines and theology. Most people are like, okay, that makes sense, but are you cool? Do you like me? Do you like people who aren't liked? Do you exist for the good of the whole, or do you exist for yourself? That's the unspoken question everybody is asking. And Balthasar says, love alone is credible. Nothing else can be believed, and nothing else should be believed. Nothing but love should be believed, he's saying. And he's saying that it is an impossibility for people really to believe anything else. They may go along with the system. They may culturally be connected with it. They may go through the motions and the forms because of habit. But the only thing that gives Christianity any credibility at all is the way we treat the people in the most disadvantaged positions in our world. Apart from that, we are draining the name of Jesus and our very movement from all authority to have anything to say that anybody will want to listen to. Listen, in the world we live in right now, that is so livid with hate and political strife, I mean, if you're paying attention at all, the whole thing has just gone way out of control. I'm going to suggest to you that in a world of hate, that love is the most revolutionary thing that we can do right now. The alternative community that is the Church of Christ needs to pause, take a deep breath, reread our script, the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, follow up with the writings of Paul. We need to reread our marching orders and ask ourselves the question, what does it actually mean to be the church of God in this world? Thank you.